Good afternoon and welcome to the HIMSS NCA webinar series. We're very excited to have you all here. I know folks are still trickling in, but we'll go ahead and start announcements to give our speakers as much time as possible in the hour window that we have. So welcome to the day in the life of a DHA usability project. We're super excited to have you here. Next slide, please. I'm Mandy Peckham, I'm the HIMSS NCA program chair, and we really appreciate everybody who has stayed with us throughout our webinar series as we all adapt to being virtual and look forward to hopefully seeing everyone's faces in person soon. All right, in terms of upcoming events, we've got our last scheduled webinar, August 19th on health, privacy, and equity in digital health. And then stay tuned for announcement to our hopefully in-person fall 2021 program lineup being announced soon. We'll probably still continue some webinars after that, but we're hoping to, as rules allow, get back to in-person soon. All right, and speaking with that, huge thank you to our corporate sponsors, Cerner and ServiceNow, and to our facility sponsor, LMI, who's graciously opened up their facility once things get back to our new normal. All right, now on to the topic at hand. I want to introduce our speakers today. We have Dr. Kelly Blasco with us. She is the counseling psychologist leading the mHealth clinical integration section for DHA's Connected Health branch. And we've got Sequoia Sims, who's the senior user experience designer and manager leading DHA's web and mobile technology UX team. We're super excited to have them here. This has been a few months in the making with Kelly and I brainstorming, and we're super happy to have her with us, as well as all for babies too. All right, Dr. Blasco, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Whoops. Can you all see that? Okay. So very excited to be here with my colleague Sequoia Sims and our tester today, Chelsea Sims. As Mandy mentioned, I work for the Defense Health Agency. And for the past 11 years, I've been working on developing digital health tools for the military health system for our beneficiaries. And at the beginning of that, I developed and managed the child portfolio of Military Kids Connect and Sesame Street for military families. And one of my most exciting parts of my job is to manage the DHA usability lab that we're going to talk about today. You know, what's so exciting about that to me is that we're actually getting user information and feedback about these tools so that they can be used to improve overall health. And prior to being a psychologist, years ago, I was an engineer, and I worked in this field in the 1990s. And what's so exciting is that back then it was kind of a one-of thing, and actually testers were PhDs in a lot of ways, but the field has come quite a bit where now it's a best practice in all development as a way to make these tools user friendly, as well as to reduce costs in development. So Sequoia had the great idea to have a fun fact. So I'm going to start with that. Many moons ago, many moons ago, I played in basketball, and I was rather thin and bony at that time. So that my teammates called me Killer because I was such a lightweight, but I could get in there and fight against anybody. So without further ado, I'll send it over to Sequoia to let her introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Dr. Blasco. Hello, everyone. My name is Sequoia Sims. I am the UX manager and senior designer for our team out here in Tacoma for the WMT. And I have the pleasure of working with some really outstanding usability and UX practitioners, where we are the ones kind of on the ground doing all of the usability studies and everything encompassed with that for all of the work that comes into our lab. We also do the UX side, so looking at designing websites and apps, all with our individual audience members at the core of what it is that we do. So I think I can speak for everybody when I say we're really passionate about our roles here. And I'm very excited to be able to chat with you all today about kind of the eaches of what we do in a typical usability study. So my fun fact, I can't say many eons ago, but a few years ago when I was in college, I participated in roller derby. I did a little stint there, and that was really awesome. So I'm really interested in trying to get back into that. But I'm telling you, I had the time of my life skating with some really strong, powerful women. So that was cool. Dr. Blasco.
So, yeah, so I also want to introduce our other participant. We're kind of going a little rogue with our presentation today. One thing that we have found is that a lot of people don't really have a good sense of what a usability test is. And we have found that when we brief people, leaders, partners, so on, that if we actually run them through a test, that they better understand. So we recruited Captain Chelsea Sims to be our tester today. But just as a short introduction, she graduated from West Point. She's currently a captain in the Army, and she's starting studies in IO psychology at NYU. So we're very happy to have her be the guinea pig. So, so without further ado, let's see here. I got everything. So what we thought we'd start with is a poll question. We wanted to get some sense of what your experience is with usability testing from the audience. And so you see here, I think you can just vote on the poll. It's, will we see, Caitlin, we'll see the results.
I will publish the results as soon as they're done.
Okay.
It looks like we've gotten most of the participants, so I will go ahead and share the results.
So we see that not everybody has had some usability experience, either testing or conducting a test, but there are quite a few, about half of our audience that has not. So it'll be great to see where we head with this. So thank you so much. Very good information. So I'm going to turn it over to Sequoia to talk about what is usability.
Okay, so when I describe usability, I like to use this photo here as a reference because it really does give a good depiction on what the breakdown of usability is and what it actually means. So when you look at this image on the far right, you see a path, concrete, pretty stable. It took a lot of time, energy, resources, money to get that there. But on the left side, you see a path, a pretty beaten path where most people are using it to get from point A to point B. So when you look at this, you can generally tell that not many folks are using the more concrete, stable path that's on the ground there. So if developers maybe would have come to the table and maybe kind of did a little bit of observation and watched how people were moving around this campus and what their fastest directions of travel were, they may have been able to assess that there was a better way to lay the path and really kind of meet the needs of the people who were going to be using it. So when we think about usability, we're looking at defining, what the best methods are for understanding what people actually need and making sure that we're using their actual voices in determining those needs and meeting the goals that they have. So sometimes there's a bit of a gray area between what businesses want and what people want. And our job is to kind of figure out what that middle ground is and make that happen. One of the most important things I like to mention here is that while we all have great ideas, me as a designer and usability practitioner or a stakeholder comes, with an idea of what they'd like to do, we have to remember at the end of the day, it's not about us. We're not the users. It's about the people who are using the products that we're putting out to the public. So usability tests generally reveal major strengths, product flaws, or any areas of confusion that we'd like to focus on to make the product better.
So, just as a little bit of background, the usability lab, the DHA usability lab started in 2012. It was actually stood up. It was run by the National Center for Telehealth Technology under the Defense Center of Excellence. And at that time, there were quite a few deployments happening, and there were a lot of, we were starting to develop web and mobile apps to help with improve the behavioral health of our service members upon return from a deployment. But it's since grown to where it's not just service members, but all of the military health system beneficiaries, whether it be service members, spouses, retirees, children, and so on. And the types of digital health tools we're developing span across many clinical areas, and also across all services. It's not just a particular service branch. So it's pretty exciting. And so our lab mission actually hasn't changed, except for to accommodate the fact that digital health technologies are changing and that we're listening above and beyond just service members, but across the military community. And that can include healthcare providers as well.
So our usability lab offers 7 methods for conducting usability session, and I'll run through those with you briefly. The first one is A/B testing. So really, that's kind of just giving someone maybe 2 to 3 different options of something that looks very similar. So maybe an app or a layout or a particular interaction flow, asking them to take a look at that and let us know which one they prefer and why, and then which one they least prefer and why. The second is interactive testing. So that's kind of our one-on-one sessions where we have a practitioner sit down with a participant and kind of go through a task-based session where we don't offer them any assistance. We just say, hey, here's a task, we'd like to watch you complete it, and then they execute accordingly. And then we just capture, what we're observing in the process and then asking leading questions throughout. The heuristic analysis, that's where we have practitioners maybe kind of pull up a website or an app and really use their skill set to walk through it and evaluate the things that work well, things that don't work well, and some recommendations based off overall heuristics for said app or website. Participatory design, that's where we sit down with an individual and really talk through, hey, what would you like to see in a digital product? Again, whether that's an app or site, it's here's a concept, tell me what works for you. And then we take that feedback that they give and then implement that in the next version or the next step of creating whatever said product is. The next one's card sorting, and that really focuses on information architecture or overall navigation. So we give a participant a series of cards with different navigational topics on them and ask them to organize them in the ways that make sense to them. And then we'll evaluate that based off what other people said and figure out a good navigational structure that most people would expect to reasonably see. The next is small surveys, pretty cut and dry. We create surveys in different platforms, send those out, really just trying to get quick responses to collect some supplemental and qualitative data. And the last one is focus groups, where we sit down with a group of individuals, show them whatever the product is, and just have a conversation about what it is that they're seeing and what their thoughts are. Oh, Dr. Blaska, is it working?
Dr. Blasko, I think you might be on mute, just FYI.
There we go. Okay. So we generally have 4 overarching steps when it comes to conducting a usability study. The first one is really going to outline the background information, right? Like defining what the test content is, what are the goals, what are the criteria, what is it that we're looking for, and then creating a strategy based on those things that we can utilize to move forward with implementing the study. The next thing is the recruitment piece. So looking at how we are going to define the demographics for the particular study and then doing the actual recruitment as needed. Then we'll move into what I call the fun stuff, the test, right? And so that's where we set the stage in terms of creating a script, making sure we go through the eaches with doing kind of a background check on our own in terms of systems. A lot of what we've been doing lately has been virtual, so we've had a lot of hurdles to jump there, just kind of ironing out the kinks, and then doing the actual one-on-one sessions or A/B tests or any of the capabilities that I mentioned on the previous slide. Once all that testing is done, the team then does a thorough analysis and synthesis of everything that they found, really looking at identifying some trends, pain points, things that worked well, some aha moments of things that maybe occurred that we didn't expect, and then making sure we create recommendations for how to fix some of those issues and really just articulating the overall synopsis of what we discovered in the study. When we do the recommendations, it's generally delivered in a findings and recommendations report that outlines all of that content that I just listed.
In a minute, we're going to actually run through those steps, but I did want to step back and give you a sense of the value to the DoD. You know, these studies, they're not actually studies, they're a type of testing, but it can affect a lot of our beneficiaries. So for example, the DS Logon project, DS Logon is used to access our patient portals. And so if it doesn't work effectively or is a barrier, many patients would not get access to their patient information. So we worked on a project to try to optimize the login experience so that when patients have access to their data, they can actually have better outcomes. And this impacts 9.4 million beneficiaries within the military health system. Another one, for example, is Exceptional Family Member Program mobile app. You know, these families are challenged by dependents that have special learning needs and chronic medical conditions, and military life of constantly relocating and deployments sometimes can be challenging. And so we worked on a project where we actually got patient or parent feedback to improve this tool that would assist them throughout those various things. And finally, I'll just mention for Military Kids Connect, we actually sat down with teens in our youth center here, teen center, to look. We were updating the website to get feedback on the look and feel, as well as how they would language that they use to understand and how the information could be organized. And that really impacts about 1.7 million military children within the community. So here we go. Grab a pen and paper and let's get to work. So we really want you to help us with this. So it's only going to be as good as your participation. Well, of course, it's going to be good regardless, but please get it out and we'll kind of walk you through this, and hopefully you'll have some information that will help us. So let's get going.
All right, so as Dr. Blasco mentioned, it's going to be extremely interactive. So we're going to take everything that we just covered and pretty much put it into action and make it kind of practical for everybody to really get an understanding of what it takes to conduct a usability study. So step one in this process, again, is defining our test criteria, goals, and content. And that's generally made up of two major steps: conducting a kickoff meeting with our stakeholder, and then creating a statement of work. So in the kickoff meeting, again, that's where we have a sit down, generally the entire team will sit with our stakeholder and really try to dissect some of the information that we need to understand the project. So things include background information about whatever it is that we'll be evaluating, understanding the overall goals and objectives that the stakeholder has, and then also really kind of defining what the target audience is in terms of demographics. Sometimes some of our tests have multiple audiences instead of just one, which is important to know up front because that of course affects recruitment. And then other things include things like timeline and any additional information that kind of comes out while we're asking some pointed questions during the kickoff. So at this time, what we'll do is go through a mini kickoff with Dr. Blasco and myself. I do ask that you take some notes jot down some things that stick out to you, and then we'll circle back and have a brief discussion about what was covered.
Okay, so I am going to pull to share my screen with the usability lab page. Now we're really exposing ourselves because I will tell you this is not what we would want it to be. So this is going to be kind of fun. So you see we have a page on health.mil that actually is where we want to recruit patients. And you'll see we have lots of information here. You see we're part of Connected Health and different buttons and whatnot. But the problem that we've been having is that we're not getting a lot of volunteers to sign up to volunteer this way. We have a lot of things through social media and so on that direct people to this site, and we see that they're directed, but it seems like we're losing the opportunity to get volunteers. So Sequoia, I would really like it if you could help me figure out, or my team, to improve kind of the capture rate of volunteers that would come to us and sign up. So
Okay, so Dr. Blasco, it sounds like part of the issue is, you have this website where you want to capture volunteers, you're not getting as much traction as you'd like, and we really want to figure out why that is. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay, and then can you talk to me a bit about who your audience is? Who do we want to focus on for this study?
Well, one of the group's service members are core to our military health system, and the military, obviously, because we want them to stay medically ready. So we do have a lot of challenges in recruiting service members. So we don't want to lose anyone that is interested. So that's who I'd like to really get the majority of the volunteers on this for this test.
Okay, great. And can you talk to me briefly about just your overall goals and objectives? If there were maybe 2 or 3 major things you wanted to pull from this study, what would those be?
I think it would be tell me how to update the page so that it would be more likely to get volunteers, and to understand whether the terminology might be right, the organization of the page, and so on. Does that help?
Yes, that helps. That's great. So Dr. Blasco, I think I have a general understanding of what it is you're asking for. What I'd like to do is kind of go to the drawing board with my team, figure out a best approach in terms of what we can do based off our capabilities. We'll create a statement of work and be in touch with you very soon for how we can make this happen. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right, so everyone, in a nutshell, that's generally how our kickoff meetings go. Dr. Blasco was an excellent stakeholder in that she knew right away exactly what she wanted. That's not generally what happens. Normally, we have to ask a lot of probing questions to really get what the person wants up front, so that when we hang up that phone call or video chat, whatever it is, our team has the warm and fuzzy that we know exactly what to do moving forward. So I'd like to ask, did anybody pick out anything that stood out to them? What did you all capture in that conversation in terms of things we wanted to know? So please feel free to drop it in the chat, raise your hand.
We did have one person chime in and ask what they do for outreach to get to volunteers today as maybe an additional question could have been asked.
We will get to that.
Great question. I love that. Okay, anything else? All right, so what I have here is basically kind of the meat of the information that was captured during the kickoff with Dr. Blasco. I feel that we are now able to walk away understanding the general background, right? This whole page, or the premise of the page, is to explain what usability and the usability lab is, and trying to garner some volunteers, whether that's from providers or military practitioners, anything of that nature. Our overall goals and objectives being, how do we get volunteers to submit these inquiries and follow through? What is it that we need to do to improve, to increase that overall traction? What's preventing people from submitting their inquiries to begin with? And then our target audience seems to be our enlisted service members. So that's a general area that we'll focus on.
Claire, we also had one more comment come in that just said, want to make sure the terminology is easy to understand. That was something they took away from the conversation we had.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. Oftentimes, we have to adjust the terminology that our stakeholders are using, or even us as a usability team, to make sure that people who are actually using these products get it, that they understand. Because if they don't, they're going to go, I'm not using this, I don't get it. So great question or great statement.
And we had one more come in just now. It says, much of what we do is constrained by circumstances outside the control of the business owner. Like in the example, the website may have had limitations to what each page owner can do. How do you maintain expertise in the different large system constraints?
So I would say what we would do is, in this case, when we do the study, and we'll go through it, and we kind of gather everything individuals that any and everybody that could be using this site says, we take that, we roll that up, show that to the stakeholders, and then also let them know, hey, listen, if there are constraints with implementing whatever a recommended change is, then we circle back and say, here's another way we can maybe achieve whatever the goals or the ask is based off the limitations you have on the site. So oftentimes, it's entirely up to the stakeholder or the owner to determine what it is they can and cannot do, and we won't know that until after the fact. But if it's up front, we're usually pretty good about being able to adjust our recommendations to fit the limitations that they have in place.
Yeah, and I would add that is a lot of stakeholders know those limitations and when they actually come to the kickoff meeting. So that's another way that we capture it.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So I'm bringing back our capabilities for the usability lab here, because at this point, this is where we would kind of assess what the study is about and then decide which of these methodologies makes the most sense moving forward. So what are your all's thoughts on the different methodologies, and what do you recommend we use for our sessions?
I'm sorry, I can't see the chat, so Mandy, if you see it.
No worries, I'm on it.
Yeah, drop it in the chat.
I see someone said A/B and interactive testing.
Okay.
Got focus groups as another answer. Surveys, another focus group.
Okay. Looks like the majority is focus groups, participatory. Yep. Great. Okay. All great ways to do it. So there's really no wrong way by any means to do this. I would recommend in this case that we either do the interactive testing, right? The one-on-one sessions where we sit down with individuals and give them the task and ask them to walk through it. Or we do a focus group, right? If we have maybe 5 people, small group, we open up the website and just click through it and ask them their thoughts. Those would be my 2 top ways of doing it. But in this case, we're going to go with the interactive testing one-on-one sessions.
There was one other comment that was made that said, I would want to learn about how and why people end up on that page.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
So that, and you won't see it here in our condensed test session, but those types of questions are generally the very first that we ask in the interview portion. So when we start a test, we have a few interview questions, then we move into the task, and that's exactly the type of information we're looking to capture.
Yeah, and I think that that helps, because I think I mentioned about coming from social media and promoting and stuff. So that might be even extend to that type of marketing, like what kind of things they'd like to see. So it's kind of end to end in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so everything that we just covered in terms of all the information gathered from the kickoff meeting and our decision to implement the interactive one-on-one testing feeds directly into what's called the statement of work, which is basically an agreement between our team and the stakeholders outlining everything that we need to cover for the usability study. So we're looking at the overall background, the scope, who our demographic audience is, what the requirements related to that are, our recruitment methods, again, the overall objectives and goals. And then we also get very granular with our methodology and outlining exactly how we're going to do the test, how many people are going to be participating ideally, what our overall assumptions, limitations, and constraints may be. Again, most recently, some of that has been virtual because we've had a lot of hiccups just, with internet connections and getting people online. Some of that may be that we're testing something like a mobile app that we would traditionally do in person on a mobile device, but we're asking people to do it on a desktop and sharing their screen. So people often have different cognitive expectations when that happens. So we also look at deliverables, which I mentioned before, with our findings and recommendations, and then giving them a projected timeline for how long it's going to take us to complete each of those steps and when we plan to deliver the overall product. One thing I want to point out regarding the statement of work, that we don't do any work. We have that initial agreement and this is living document. So if something changes like recruitment efforts, or we need to adjust the demographics, or it's just taking too long to do a certain stage, we go in, we update, we agree, we drive on. So very important thing with the statement of work. Okay, Dr. Blasco, we can keep going. Step 2, recruitment. Dr. B, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the recruitment because this is probably one of the hardest parts of the usability test in terms of how we get people and so on. So the first thing I'll talk about the demographic and quantity of participants, how we do it, and the constraints. But before I do that, I have another poll for you. How many participants do you typically need to capture 80% of the usability issues?
The polling is taking place.
Great, thank you.
We'll give it a few more seconds while we get our last
Sounds good.
couple.
Yep. And you're not allowed to Google it, by the way.
All right, I will go ahead and share the results.
Okay, this is really good. So actually, we range from 3 to 4 to 14 plus. So we have to remember that this is not research and we're really looking at usability. So actually, in terms of a best practice, you only need 5 to 7 participants to capture 80% of the user issues. So you don't need a large N as you would think in research. And it's been proven over and over that trend, like you reach almost saturation after 5 or 7. So in some ways that helps recruitment in that you don't have to have large quantities of participant, but it can hard to get the specific user. And the other thing is, if you had multiple things to do that you wanted to test or objectives over time, maybe that's too, you want to make a change the first time and test it the second time. You often want to kind of save your users so that you can have access to new users each time. So as I mentioned, we recruit here. We're located on Joint Base Lewis McChord in Western Washington. And we actually have the luxury to have access to all services, service members from all services, as well as the reserves and National Guard. But we have some really significant constraints but have still been successful. So for example, we cannot give monetary incentives to many of our beneficiaries to participate in the test. So we really rely on them to provide volunteer hours. And, the stakeholder or us may have promo items that are attractive to be able to hand out as part of thank you for doing the test.
Kelly, We have
Yep.
two comments come in, sorry to interrupt
Sure.
here.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, no worries.
It said, so one was a question, one was a comment. The first one was a question. It says, it depends on the complexity of the path testing, doesn't it? I think that has to do with the number of participants. And then the second one was more of a comment and says, depends on your methods and who your participants are.
Well, a good point. I was thinking more for user testing and user interactive testing that we're doing today, which is probably, you're right. Focus groups, though, 5 to 8 is probably enough. You can have multiple focus groups, but I think what the issue, there's two parts to it. You're right, the complexity of the test. However, even complex things only need 5 to 7. If you want to do phase testing, again, you do 5 to 7 in each phase. And we're talking about interactive testing. And also, if you're doing multiple types of user audience, so like, let's say healthcare providers and service members of the same test, you have to have 5 to 7 of each. So it's just a good rule of thumb. Obviously, there are exceptions like surveys and whatnot, but the actual user testing is the one that is about 5 to 7. Is that correct, Sequoia?
Yes, that's correct. A good example of this is we did one for Military One Source, and we did it in 2 parts. So the first part, or one of the parts, was we did kind of the one-on-ones, right, where we had 5 to 7 individuals review it, and that interactive component of usability testing. And then in the second portion of the study, we did card sorting. So that's where we had 16 plus participants come in to gather their thoughts and insight on overall navigational changes and what their expectations were. So that's a good example of where there is a difference in the number of participants you need based on the type. But again, the general rule of thumb is 5 to 7 people can give you just about 80% or more of the trends, whether that's things that work well, things that don't work well, for you to be able to take that information, capture it, and then improve.
Yeah, and the user testing is really one of the bread and butter for this individual testing for the work that we do. And the majority of the types of requests that best follows. Which goes to point, for example, for focus groups. Prior to COVID, we did many focus groups in person. So to actually get people to come to the lab and do a focus group is very difficult. Not to say that we can't do it, but it's a little bit easier to get one person at a time. So there's all kinds of aspects. But I did want to mention some of the constraints that are unique to the military community. So for active duty service members, for example, we can't typically test them during their duty time. They're there to serve our country and to be ready for their missions. So if we were to get them during duty time, it would require us to get approval from command. And it might be their unit command, but it might also be their battalion command, depending on the circumstances. Also, for example, with healthcare providers, we run into the issue that they're supposed to be doing clinical work and they're measured, and we have many patients. They can't just give an hour necessarily or half an hour of their time. So we have to think about that as well. And then being the military, we have a lot of security issues, and that can impact what technologies we can use. So the approaches that we've found that work, one, I think is pretty obvious. We having personal contacts with various units. And because we're located on a base, we have access to people that are in the military. And many of the people that work within our organizations are either former military or spouses or children of military right now. The other key thing is partnerships. So we work with public affairs within the medical command or even just the battalion command to explain what we're doing and have them see that the value of it, and then they approve whether we can get a partner. So when we have a test, we might reach out to them saying we need such and such, and they can provide the time for the recruits to come. But one of the biggest, most successful ways at this point are pop-up events. We used to have sort of people coming through the lab, and so that required them to come to the lab. But more and more we've been able to do, not with COVID, but to do is pop-up events at facilities like where people are in processing, out processing, where they're being trained, so on and so forth. And we also use a volunteer system that's available. Many service members can get awards or service awards for putting in volunteer time. So those are just some of the things. And we also use marketing and social media quite a bit across many channels, even the local, like Joint Base Lewis McChord, Facebook, and so on. So that's the recruiting. And we usually have to allow at least 2 weeks for recruiting in order to get the people scheduled and then begin the testing.
All right, so our next step is creating preparations and then the overheads.
Yeah, and I'm seeing we're running a little, we may want to rush through a little bit of things, Sequoia.
Yeah, no problem, Dr. Blasco. So when it comes to creating our script, some of the major things I want to point out is that we generally use this as an outline and then also as a means of ensuring that if anybody else on the team needs to step in and take over usability or a particular test, they're able to follow this document and kind of very successfully complete said usability sessions. So some of the things we look at in these scripts is, making sure that we're staying in line with the overall goals and objectives. It's really easy to go down a rabbit hole because you think of all these great ideas of things we could be looking at, but we have to remember to stay in line with whatever the focus area is. Oftentimes we associate tasks and scenarios with whatever it is that we're outlining. So just calling out the fact that we're going to have someone look at something specific and then giving them a scenario to kind of get their mindset in the right place. Like, hey, so-and-so, imagine that you just moved to JBLM from Alaska. With that in mind, how would you complete X, Y, and Z? The questions that we come up with, we want to make sure that they're open-ended, that we allow space for follow-on questions. We don't want to try to direct someone to a certain answer. It's really about capturing how they authentically feel, how their authentic experience was when they were navigating through whatever the product they're looking at is. We also make sure to point out the fact that we're not testing the person, we're testing the product. Sometimes, depending on the demographic group, and we've seen this more with our elderly population, they'll get extremely frustrated really fast because the system in itself isn't working, but they blame themselves. So we make a point of making sure they know it's not you, it's the system. And then the last point here is making sure people think out loud. We want to hear what they have to say. And the only way to do that generally is to have them think out loud, express everything as they're going through it. Okay, all of that in mind, I'll take a few moments to give you all an opportunity to drop some questions in the chat that you would ask the participant in the usability session for this particular project.
And Sequoia, we had one comment come in right as you were asking that. Well, we have other people drop their answers to that, and it says, we sometimes use the language, quote, "I did not design this product system, so please be honest about your thoughts. You won't hurt my feelings, and your feedback will help to improve this." We also use, quote, "no wrong answers" phrasing for clinicians when they have to make clinical decisions.
Absolutely, yes. You will hear me say something very similar in this mock session that we're going to do. Spot on, Helen. So if anybody has any ideas of questions that they would ask in this session, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll utilize those in our mock session. Good question, Adam. All right, I have a few prepared. Adam, that was a great question. I'm going to make sure we add that in here. And we can get started with this mock test session. So Chelsea, again, will be our volunteer. Every test generally has a facilitator and an observer. That way the observer can do all the note taking and really kind of taking a look at what's actually happening and allowing the facilitator to focus on navigating the person through the test as needed. So I will be the facilitator. I ask that those who are willing to participate, you be the observers, jot down a couple notes, and we'll get started. Okay, so again, we always start with our introduction. Chelsea, hi, I'm Sequoia. I will be facilitating this usability study. I am joined by a great panel of individuals out there whom I cannot see. They'll be taking notes and kind of making sure they capture all of the things that you experience and mention through this usability session. I want to make sure I let you know that the premise of you being here is really to evaluate our DHA Usability Lab page. And we're really looking to uncover your overall thoughts, feelings, anything that comes up about, what you experience when you're here and what your experience going through submitting a volunteer form is. Some things to keep in mind. Your thoughts are of utmost importance. I want to hear any and everything on your mind. You're not going to hurt my feelings. It's really to make sure that we capture what you're saying to make this better. We're testing the site. We're not testing you. So if you get confused or frustrated, totally fine. Just let me know. I'm here to watch you move through this, so I won't necessarily help you, but if you get too stuck, I'll step in and kind of guide you to the next thing if we need. And the last thing I want to point out is move through this like you're at home, like you're alone by yourself. There's nobody there. You're just trying to click through it and complete whatever the task is that I give you. And again, if you get stuck, just let me know and we'll move through from there. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns before we get started?
No, I'm ready to go.
Awesome. Okay, so before you take a look at the site, Chelsea, and do any clicking around, quick question for you. Have you ever actually been to this usability lab page?
I have not. It looks like I clicked on health.mil, so let me go back to the page.
Yeah, there we go. Awesome. So you've not been to this page before. Is there any particular reason why that is?
I didn't know that this page existed.
Okay, well, welcome to the usability lab. Go ahead and take a moment, scroll down through that page and just let me know your thoughts on what you think you can do here.
Okay, so in scrolling through here, it looks like I've got a few options. I could, if I were a product owner, so if I were somebody that actually owned a page or an application, I could request a usability test to make my application or website better. If I'm just a regular run-of-the-mill volunteer, I could sign up to actually volunteer for a usability test. And then as a military leader, I have the ability to kind of gather some more information about the volunteer hours and moving towards an MOVSM.
Okay, wonderful. So if you were here to sign up as a volunteer, on your own, could you walk me through how you would do that?
Yeah, sure. So it looks like first time of opening up the page, I could actually click here, volunteer today. We'll see where that takes me. I don't know if that actually opened up anything. It looks like it opened up an email. So as an email, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know exactly what I'm supposed to be saying. So I'm just going to close out of all of this nonsense so that everybody can not read all of my personal emails. I'm gonna scroll down then and see. I'm assuming if I click this again, it's gonna pop me out to an email, and I don't want to do that. So I would just fill out this form right here. So let me do that now. Let's see, I'm on JBLM. I'm an active duty service member in the Army, and I want to volunteer. And then I would click submit. Okay, so it says my form's been submitted. So I'm hoping somebody on the other end is getting my information.
Okay, great. So walk me through that overall experience that you had with just kind of figuring out what you needed to do to submit the form and then trying to do that and then actually submitting it.
Yeah, so I think the volunteer today button should have taken me to the form itself. I assumed that it was going to maybe open up another tab to take me to the form, or just take me all the way down to the bottom where the form was actually residing on the web page. So to open an email was kind of confusing to me, because again, I didn't know necessarily what information off the bat you guys would need. If I just sent an email, hey, I'm a captain in the military, I want to volunteer, is that going to get you the information that you need to plug me into the right group to conduct a usability test? So as soon as I figured out, I scroll all the way down to the bottom and fill in that information. I'm just hopeful that somebody on the other end is actually receiving it.
Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like in your experience, you expected a form or to be taken directly to a form once you clicked on those buttons in terms of volunteering. And you said also that there was a bit of confusion when you saw that it opened your email and you weren't quite sure what to say. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, Chelsea. So this generally concludes our usability study. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to share in terms of maybe things that worked well or didn't, recommendations?
No, I think the only other thing I would want to know more about is the volunteer opportunity information. So I'm going to click on this. I know this isn't part of your study, but I'm going to click on this, see where it's me. And it looks like it probably opened my email again. So that's not necessarily helpful to me as a user. I would rather open a PDF or something along those lines so I could actually read through what the volunteer opportunities actually entail. So I can then divvy it down to my soldiers and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Wonderful, awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for your feedback. It's definitely going to directly influence what we do to move forward and make this better so that hopefully the next time you're on here in the future using it, it meets the expectations that you have in mind. So again, thank you so much. Okay, so that was just a very condensed version of what we generally do when we're doing a usability session, making sure the individuals understand what it is we're asking for, and then walking them through the individual tasks that they need to complete to garner the information we need to meet the stakeholders' objectives. So, did anybody have any aha moments or things that they learned from this quick session that they feel is worth mentioning?
We got a couple in here from Helen. It says, is there a lot of traffic to this site? Do people just go looking for volunteer opportunities? We usually have to reach out and find people.
Dr. Blasco, that's actually a great question for you.
Yeah, actually, we have people that do sign up through this, but not many. You're right, we have to go out and look for, but we do. The other thing we do is once we have someone volunteer, usually they want to come back. So we keep a database of all the people that have interest or have done a test. And that, I forgot to mention, that helps quite a bit as well. But obviously sometimes you don't want to use the same user, but that, yeah, that helps. And we drive them through communications plans, Facebook pages, and so on. But that's the main. We don't get that many, but we do get more than we are capturing their information.
Okay, great. So moving on, our next step is creating our overall recommendations for improvement. And so when we're doing that, Dr. Blasco, you can move to the next slide. When we're doing that, we generally will take all of that information that Chelsea just explained and everything we just learned about her experience moving through this and do what I call a brain dump. So after every session, we list out all of the things that we found, whether those were aha moments, pain points, key discoveries, anything of that nature. And then once we're done with all of the test sessions, again, generally between 5 and 7 of them, we'll take everything that we found, do the synthesis and analysis, and use that to identify trends and create our overall deliverable, being the findings and recommendations report. In the interest of time, we're going to keep chugging through. So here's an example of what our findings and recommendations report looks like. In general, we have a, oh, there we go. So basically we lay out all of the information that we discern through the study, again, looking at positive responses, friction areas, and then we really map out where those areas are, typically through wireframes, as you can see on here. with little bullet points that say, okay, here's where we saw friction areas, here's where we saw other things, and then the subsequent sheets would articulate what our recommendations are. Oftentimes, when possible, we'll lay out the recommendations through wireframes so that our stakeholders have a very clear visual on exactly what we mean in the write-ups that explain, here's the problem, here's, why it's a problem, and here's the recommendation for how to fix said problem. Once we deliver these recommendations, we generally follow up with a debrief, and that's the team's opportunity to sit down with the stakeholder, walk them through these findings step by step, and then continue the discussion or dialogue to answer any questions they may have for clarification or anything of that nature.
Yeah, and I might add that that's a time, like someone had asked, what if you have constraints? That usually is a time when that comes up here. So then we can do a next step or like follow back with different recommendations. So, okay, so this concludes our kind of mini test and brief. And I hope it gave you an understanding of the steps as well as some of the challenges that we face and that you probably face as well if you want to do some usability testing. And we just had glad that we could have shared this information with you, and happy to answer any questions. I know we're kind of out of time, but our contact information, I believe, is we can put it in the chat. And feel free to reach out either to myself or Sequoia. If you need a tester, I know a good one too.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We did have, I know we have only a couple minutes left. We did have one person comment about the having challenges around getting sample representatives for their tests as kind of being one of their main problems. So in the interest of time, I don't know if we can get to it, but if you want to address that really quick.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes you try and you can't get it. So sometimes you have to kind of get a substitute that might be maybe the next best type of person. You're right, people who seek, but we really haven't actually had that many people. Like when we do the pop-up, people that you wouldn't normally get if you reached out, they come and participate depending on where your pop-up is, like a library or whatever. So we actually haven't run into that where there's been a difference between people who do and don't. Most people don't know what usability testing is. So
that makes sense. We also had one more really quickly about where there's been any collaborating with VA on any joint EHR issues.
With the VA? Yeah, actually, there has been some collaboration. We have a joint patient engagement work group with the VA, and some of this integrates into that. Obviously, we want to make that process from service member to veteran transition as easy as possible. That's what we've been focusing on.
Wonderful. All right. So I see Sequoia just put her contact information in there, and Kelly, if you're comfortable with that too, I'm sure folks would appreciate that. But we're pretty much out of time. This has been great. Thanks for everybody that was so interactive. This has definitely been one of my favorite events in terms of interactive and engagement, and the first time we've done polls in the middle of our webinars. So thanks for bringing us into more creative ways of expanding our engagement with our speakers. So Dr. Blasco, Sequoia, Chelsea, thank you guys so much for your time today. Thanks everybody that joined. And please consider joining our webinar in August, and more to come on the fall program as things get closer and open back up. Really appreciate you guys. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you all.